Medium rare. Are you serious? Slightly Mad Mystic. Welcome to the Art of Conscious Living. I'm so very pleased today to have as my guest Lawrence Furman. He is a medium who practices mediumship, and he has an incredible book that is about to be released. How are you today?
Hi, it's good to be here.
Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks.
You have an amazing story to tell, so let's go right to the very beginning. I understand that you clinically died 3 times, and in those death, you saw your body on the bed,
Yeah.
and you were above this, and you were leaving your body, and then you were in the hereafter.
Well, yeah, and it happened 3 different times, and what I experienced was that each time a cumulative experience happened. Each one was different, and they built upon each other to altogether turn my life around about 180 degrees and have helped shape what it is that I'm doing today.
And the name of your book is?
The name of the book is Medium Rare, Memoir of a Slightly Mad Mystic.
Beautiful, beautiful title.
Thanks.
And let's talk about the book. It's going to take us through the journey of your life, and it's going to talk about the experiences of you having these death experiences and going to the
Going
hereafter.
to the other side.
Yes.
Yeah. That's actually where the book starts. It begins with the 3 near-death experiences. The first experience is one in which, after I had left my body, I went into a complete God space. I went into a space in which there was absolute spaciousness, no thought, and an absolute sense of peace and connectedness. All the sense of I, the identities that I have developed throughout my life, completely disappeared. And in that space, there was just a quality of knowing and presence that was just an absolute, I want to say it was an absolute bliss, but in fact it wasn't a bliss. It was deeper than that. And it was just a spacious presence of absolute connectedness that had no ripple of thought whatsoever. And I realized that when I returned from that experience, from that moment on, there was a shift that had happened in my awareness. And that shift was that I began to consciously watch myself. There was a witness that developed out of that. And suddenly it was never as though all the different personality quirks and things that came through me felt like they were entirely myself. It felt like instead what I had become was a field of awareness that was in fact watching this body and all of the thoughts and personality things that began to emerge from the body, just kind of walking through life and having experience after experience after experience.
Well, for those who have not had this experience and may never have this experience, what was it like to be on the hereafter? And I understand that you met different spirit guides there.
Yeah. Beginning the second time that I went across, I was in the hospital at the time, and I was given a medicine that I was allergic to. And this time, instead of going into that immediate, open, spacious, eternal space, I rose above my body. I saw them wheeling it down the hallway, and I saw everybody start, the compressions and all that kind of thing. And I could actually tell the thoughts. I could hear the thoughts of everybody in the emergency room. I could feel the doctor, I could hear the nurses, everybody. But pretty soon I got bored of that. And I could feel my being my awareness just start floating out and upward through the roof of the hospital. And at that point, a certain kind of, like they talk about the tunnel, I could feel myself being enclosed in a kind of darkness that felt very tunnel-like. And then a sudden rush of movement. And it was as though I were flying. And what I realized was that I was flying past levels of perception that didn't relate to me. At those different levels, there are what you call ghosts and people who were hanging out close to the earth, that sort of thing. But I was flying past a lot of that until I reached a certain place. And when I reached that place, suddenly the tunnel dissipated. And I was standing there, and once more I had a body. But this time it was young, just like I was, because at that time I was about 17 years old. But there was a glow that kind of shone throughout my body. And suddenly this déjà vu experience started to pour over me. And it was like the lid had come off my subconscious. And I suddenly became aware of having died time and time and time again. And the feeling of it was so tickling that I just started laughing hysterically because it felt really good.
Did you feel a presence of other spirits?
Yeah.
And when you did acknowledge those other spirits, what was that like from the very first nano moment of this?
Yeah, I was actually in that awareness of experiencing having died so many times when all of a sudden I became aware of a presence near me. And I sort of glanced to the side, and sure enough, there was a being who was standing there, and I could feel that being running throughout myself. It was as though a wave of respectful presence came through me. Now, I was still about 17 years old, and I could feel that the being who was standing, I was identifying with being 17 years old, and the being who was standing in front of me seemed ageless, timeless, and held a space of dignity that I couldn't even begin to describe.
So obviously you came back,
Yeah.
but there must have been a moment perhaps that, did you ever think maybe you don't want to come back?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. As a matter of fact, with that being, I expressed to him, I don't want to go back. I was sick. I was in the hospital. I wasn't feeling well. And at a certain point, I actually started arguing with him. And I was witnessing myself arguing with this being. And it was almost like I was saying in the back of my mind, what are you doing? This is ridiculous. Whoever this is beautiful and wonderful. And what are you doing standing here arguing with them? But I kind of couldn't help myself. And so I continued to make my case. I don't want to go back. But the being seemed to just absolutely understood me and sort of drank me in like lemonade, you know. I just was so accepted and was so non-judged and so very loved. But also he was very stern with me, and he said, "You are going back." And when he said that, he reached out and touched me here on the shoulder. And as soon as his touch happened, I just started falling backwards and backwards and backwards, and I was back in the tunnel and found myself blanking out at a certain point, and then I woke up back in the hospital.
How are you able to have such a recall of it? I would think perhaps that you would be blank to it, that maybe it would be erased, as they say, but you have a clear accountability of it, like it happened yesterday.
Yeah, I do, and it does feel like it happened yesterday. Throughout my life, what I've experienced occurring is that all the memory of those experiences have remained clear and are operating still present day in my life. I sense a kind of ability to step out of time. It's as though so much of my memory, even of other lifetimes and things about that, have all returned to me, and they've been coming back in droves and waves. And suddenly my sense of personality has kind of fallen away. And so now I've broadened in terms of my awareness of this field that I actually have become, and my awareness relates to. And from out of this field, there is just a tremendous amount of clarity, and I'm able to summon up any memory really that I want throughout my life. What I've come back with is I've discovered that kind of here in the heart space, there is a mandala that's been growing. And I describe it as a mandala because it's a kind of a spaciousness in which when I fall into that heart space, there's an awareness in which I can ask any question and the knowing begins to come. It's as though I'm reconnected with a sense of eternity and what I would call God again.
This is an amazing story. I mean, how many of us have wondered so often what it would be like when we're dying. And in a culture such as America, where we don't really talk about death. It's
No,
something.
we don't.
And there's in the last 10 years, though, it's slowly coming to the surface right now in many circles to acknowledge it. In other cultures, they definitely have a greater acceptance of it.
Yeah.
Each
Yeah.
time that you passed, you died.
Mm-hmm.
We're speaking about the first time that this happened. Were each of those 3 times the same experience?
No, they were all very unique and very different. Like I say, the first time, that was that vast spaciousness in which there was no thought, no identity. And when I came back, I had developed that witnessing awareness. The second time is when I began to recover a tremendous amount of past life memory, and I began to understand more about the whole past life idea anyway, because when I was on the other side, it wasn't as though there was a past, a present, and a future. It was simply a very vast, expanded sense of now. It was all happening at the same time. Past, present, and future were all occurring. And so I had an experience where I even felt the pull of another being who was in fact a part of my very soul, who was living also on the earth, but at another time. And I felt a part of me going back to work with that person, to help that person, because he was in a space where he wanted to commit suicide. He was like a cave person. He was living in a jungle. And I felt myself traveling back to work with that person, pass through him. And when my beingness passed through him, there was an upliftment, a quickening that happened in his own heart. And suddenly that desire to die left him, and I watched him as he went running off into the woods. But by the same token, the third time I died, someone in the same way that I had come to him came to me. Only this was a female presence. And I realized in our communication that this is who I am evolving toward. This was like a very wonderful, strange attractor that it's kind of pulling me through life and inspiring me to kind of keep going when it feels like, the world starts weighing me down and things start to get too rough. And this being I had met, her name is Clarice. And in the third time that I crossed, I was really sad, and I was really upset because it was a very violent death. And the feeling that I had from the dying was this shouldn't be happening. This didn't feel like it was in the script. It felt like this was a mistake. What's going on? Where's my mommy? Where's my daddy? And I was just sobbing and weeping in spirit. But Clarice came up and enfolded me in a kind of lovingness that's indescribable, unconditional, gentle, knowing, comforting, absolute. And she whispered to me telepathically. It wasn't as though we were speaking, but telepathically, she could pass right through my mind. And she was saying to me, your mother and father can't be with you, but I'll always be with you. And as she said it, a place opened up to where I could see my mother and father where they were on the earth. And I realized in that moment, in their mortality as people, they were as bound by earth awareness, earth consciousness, as I had been. And so there wasn't anything they could do. As a matter of fact, they didn't even know that this was happening to me.
Well, this begs for the question to be asked, what is the main difference between earth consciousness and spirit consciousness in the hereafter? I think perhaps, is it anything like people who do meditation, and for years and years of meditation, and they have this experience which they call nirvana, where it's a bliss state, and they feel connected to a vast, vast eternal energy, and they're in this complete rapture of unconditional love pouring through them. Is there anything similar to that of what you experienced in the hereafter?
Sure. And those are like what you're describing are all just states. They come, they go. They arrive, they pass through. And so it's like what I realized was that in the first death, there was a place that was absolute pure consciousness. And it's an indescribable, it doesn't really bear description here. Here it seems though as we lead our lives, we put on like blinders, like the horse does, in order to focus ourselves down the path that we're intending to live while we're here. And in order to have the experiences that come to us, it's like we kind of keep ourselves focused. But at a certain point, perhaps something opens up in us, or we fall down and onto one knee and we ask, oh God, help, because it just gets too tough down here in the world.
So it's the act of actually getting out of our own way and giving over to a higher power, whatever that power may be for that individual.
Whatever the power may be. And when that asking occurs, when the heart asks to surrender and give up running our own lives for ourselves and ask for that surrender, suddenly that power, because it's given us total free will, rushes in and begins to guide and direct us in a way that once we get that guidance and once we get that direction, then all of a sudden all these different states of consciousness become available to us, and they're all a part of the learning, they're all a part of the path.
Yes. Well, perhaps we can say that our human mind is like a technology of mind, just like a computer. And that is the small computer database. And the source energy, the spirit, the divine energy is the master computer. So a lot of people are disconnected from the master computer and they're running on the lower mainframe of a smaller technology. So therefore, in saying that, why not connect to more of a powerful energy, to the master computer that is so many terabytes in space and size, and the ultimate experience, which would be allowing the ease and the flow, the being rejuvenated every single moment, instead of having the experience of the lower computer, which it will burn out at one point in time. It goes in overload a lot of times. It stresses a lot of times. So when you're connected to the larger computer, the source energy, none of that will be happening.
Well, it's interesting because the way I would put it is that in fact we are connected to the larger computer, but what happens is our awareness gets distracted from it. And in fact, there is purposefulness in that distraction, because just like a child growing up goes through these different phases of life, infancy, toddler, becomes an adolescent eventually, and then becomes a young adult, each phase of that growth bears with it an imprinting upon what I would call the soul. There's tremendous things to be learned and to be gained from going through the process. But like you're saying, at a certain point, one begins to develop a taste for that larger connection to the computer. One begins to see through the illusion of all these experiences that are going on Earth, and begins to realize that this isn't our true home, that we're passing through, but this isn't really where we came from. And that desire to want to go home starts to build and grow. And that desire to want to go home starts to guide us toward understanding and beginning to realize that connection that's always existed between ourselves and the larger computer.
I would say to you that we're all here for this human experience, and many people are not going to ever have this experience, that they're going to die and know the hereafter like you have had. What other means could they know this source energy? I mean, this was a huge awakening for you, and it's an incredible privilege and honor, and it's a very rare experience that happens to very few people. But for the others who are not going to have this experience, let's explore that. What do you think they can
do?
Yes, they can do, and what could serve them?
Well, what I've seen is that in essence, it's all handled. It's like it's all been taken care of. In other words, from the Creator's point of view, as I experienced it, there is no death anyway. There's only everlasting life. And the experience that we call death is just merely a transition. And so there are two major transitions in any given life. No, birth when the doorway opens and on an inspiration, on an inhale, our spirit grounds itself in our being. And then that final exhale where it goes unanswered, no more inhale arrives, and we exit our body and go back to where we came from on that exhalation. And in between, there's so much opportunity for experience. The world to me doesn't seem so much about achievement as it seems about experience. And different ones of us are just like children going through stages of growth. Our souls have different desires or different intentions for the journey. So on earth at any given time, there are so many teachers and so much technologies, and especially now, because it's complicated, but there's a whole, my understanding of it is that at this time, because of the movement of the cosmos and a number of different energies that are working with the planet, there's just so much available to us. Information has been established in our world so that, you know, if a pin drops in China, it's already on the internet. Somebody knows about it. Nobody can keep secrets anymore.
So what does one need to do to tap into all of this energy and this information available?
First off, just curry the desire to wake up. It's like, and usually something will happen. Usually something happens on its own. Something spurs one to develop that desire to awake. It's like they start to see through the falseness of life. And once that begins, it's like there's a serendipity to it. Because when God begins to flood into your life, God loves agencies. There's all this guidance, spirits, angels, all sorts of different kinds of beings that start to come to us. And we get guided. You're walking along, heading for the library, and suddenly you're walking along the shelves and a book falls off. And you notice this is the book that you need to be reading right now because it contains exactly what you're trying to formulate inside, but maybe haven't quite gotten clear about. And suddenly there's the book right in your hand.
That's synchronicity.
Synchronicity, exactly.
Yes, and also being in your intuitiveness.
Yes.
And using your senses. They say that it's extrasensitory perception, ESP, but it's really not. It's effective sensitory perception.
Well, having an effective sensing little mechanism is something I think that's built into each and every one of us. However, again, it gets cloudy and it gets dull, it gets numb. And so part of the process of spiritual growth, once you get on a spiritual path, is to clarify, is to get the clouds out of the way of your heart and your mind so that you can begin to experience life more clearly.
Well, Lawrence,
as it is.
Let's clarify this word spiritual and spirituality. Okay. It's been misused, it's misunderstood, and I know I've had great conversations with you about that. So let's really explore that, what spirituality is and what it is to be spirit here and the now.
Well, for me, it's just very simple because we are spirits. And so when I look into your eyes, I see something alive and awake looking back at me, something with curiosity and something that has aspirations and just something incredibly beautiful. And when you look into the eyes of any person, you can, if you look closely enough, you'll begin to see the awakeness that lies in the soul. And for some of us, we're not here in this particular lifetime to pursue what that means to us because we're really attracted by all the baubles and bangles and opportunities and situations of the world. We want to be a fireman, and so we're going to go be a fireman, and that's great. At a certain point, when that spiritual calling begins the wake-up process, you can still be anything that you want to be because it doesn't have anything to do with how you appear in the world. It simply has to do with the way you begin to turn your attention around and begin to explore your interior, perhaps with the same zeal that you've explored the exterior world. But now you begin to see, oh, there's a wonderful cartoon I saw once, Tom and Jerry cartoon when I was a kid. It's great. It's like there's a little tent out in the desert and Tom the cat is chasing the mouse around the tent, right? But at a certain point, the mouse ducks under the tent and Tom says to himself, I got him now. Because it's just a little tent. All I got to do is lift up the flap and reach inside. And when he does, and he looks in, Tom, the mouse, Jerry, is like standing in the midst of miles and miles and miles of palaces and pools and hanging gardens and all this kind of stuff. And the cat, Tom, can't believe it. He just, comes back, looks around the tent, says, oh my gosh, what's going on here? But that's what it's like. Outside, we appear to be encapsulated by our skin. We appear to be these bodies and the identities that these bodies express. But once we begin to look inside, beyond the identities, all of that starts to fall away. And there is an endless spaciousness. There is just limitlessness that one can begin to explore. And so one begins to develop the tools to do it. And as guides come to us and help deliver us ways of developing those tools, we become adept as we practice. And that's why a spiritual practice of some kind, usually everybody who decides to explore their spirit finds themselves on a path in which they develop these tools in order to become more adept at their inner exploration.
So your first point you mentioned was the want to wake up. Mm-hmm. The second point, and further, would be what to do with that awakeness and how to get familiar with that. We're in a society today that has so much stress going on, more so than ever because of the information age.
Yeah.
And people are attached to that stress and the adrenaline that's produced by that stress. And they now believe, many individuals, that that is a natural way of being.
Yes. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Because in fact, the whole process of the spiritual search begins to reverse that. Because in fact, in a sense, real spirituality is not really attained, because that kind of assumes, again, that your identity, your ego, is out to master now spirituality, much the same way as you've mastered anything else in the world. But instead, it happens through a process of surrender, of letting go, of falling back into a presence that already exists. That's why sometimes I like to say it's already handled. It's like there's really nothing to attain, but attainment occurs paradoxically by even giving up that process of stressing out to try to achieve. But there is some, achieving in the beginning. There is some, because you scratch your head and you get into this whole spiritual thing, you say, my God, I'm attracted to it, but there's so much and there's so many teachers, and what's this all about? And so you go out and pinch the peaches. You do your own exploration. You go out into the spiritual supermarket and you start looking around. But pretty soon, just like the blunt end of a pencil that you can't really write with, it starts to get whittled away, whittled away, whittled away. And it starts to bring itself down to a more fine point. And as that starts to happen, your own inner strength, awareness, and awakeness begins to grow. And as that happens, you become more discerning. And in that discerning, you start to look around the world and you see what's really attractive and useful for you, and you see what isn't. And your journey becomes a little bit more pointed, more directed, more clarified. But still, there is a letting go in the process.
There's a beautiful saying in Tai Chi, and that it's actively letting go and passively letting go at the same time. Mm-hmm. So you are letting go, but you're doing it actively.
Yeah.
And you're actively, passively not letting go at the same time. So the two of them just balance each other out. And it sounds to be what you're speaking about, that with a lot of awareness to it, that all of it is taken care of already for us. We just have to get out of our own way.
In a sense. Sometimes there is something to do, sometimes there's nothing to do. And learning to know the difference is where wisdom lies. Mm. So sometimes there you can feel it rising from within. There's an urge, there's a desire. There may be someone you need to meet. There may be a rendezvous waiting for you around a corner. There may be a book. There may be a person. And when that urge comes, You learn to respond to it rather than to deny it or push it aside. And a lot of people talk about that, the inner voice. I heard this inner voice and it told me to do this, and you know what? I didn't pay attention and I totally missed something that went on over there. So you learn to listen to that inner voice and you learn to feel it. It may show up as a simple intuition. It may show up as something even stronger. It may show up again and again and again to try and get your attention and say, will you please do this? And eventually you do. But it's like learning to kind of be aware of what's going on in your interior. You know, it's like